I'm Tara Grabowski. I am the Chief Data Officer for the Life Science Practice for McKinsey & Company. I'm a physician by training and did that transition via startup. So it's been a really fun pivot for me, and I'm really just honored to be chatting with this group of folks today. So to keep things moving along and so that we can really spend the time chatting, I thought maybe I would do the intros. So let me just tell you a little bit about everybody who's here with me. So if I start right here next to me, I've got Sunil Dravida, and he is the Global Head of Real World Data Center of Excellence at Takeda. And so he's well suited to be talking about global data. And he's got 30 years of experience in the data and analytic space. He holds an MS in computer engineering from Villanova. And he recently published a book, which I'm realizing I just left backstage. I had it as a prop, but happy to share it with anyone afterward. But it's a fantastic book called The Real World Evidence in the Pharmaceutical Landscape, and I've been reading it and learning a lot, so it's great, thanks. Great, next to him is Shinu Katru. She's the CEO of Optum Life Sciences. She served as the CEO and president of Optum Analytics before that. And just to give you a fun fact about her, she went to Bryn Mawr College, where she served as both vice president and president of the student body. So presumably not at the same time.
No, it was scandal-free.
And then we've got Gadi Lachman. He's the CEO of TriNetX. And he was also at Lehman Brothers in the past, and my fun fact about him is that he was an officer in the Special Forces of the Israeli Army. For those of you who are data fan folks, I think you also know Tal Rosenberg. I think it was also in that same service. There's a rumor going around that he was higher ranked than Gadi, but I'm not sure if that's true. And then finally, we've got Ashish Shukla, who's principal at ZS. He's been there since 2017. He leads the RWD practice for them. And an interesting fact about him is that he was working in the data and analytics space already when 9/11 happened. And given some technology that he built in response to that around financial transactions, you know, we might have, with data and analytics, been able to prevent 9/11. And so I just think it's really neat to have someone on the stage here who's been in this space that long. All right, thanks. So listen, we're talking about globalization, right? Why is that important? And when I think about it, I've been in this space now for about 10 years. When I started working in this space, I worked on a claims database. It was TruVen at the time, and we had about 70 million lives covered in that database. And no one believed that you could touch that many people with one data set. It was early days, right? And when I think about how much has changed, claims is really largely commoditized. EMR is getting there. We've had innovations like tokenization, and we're doing wonderful things with our UIs and our platforms and our analytics capabilities. There are still some emerging frontiers. I think we're getting there on image science, right? We're working on path. And I think one of these frontiers that's really critical right now is globalization of data, right? And so this is what we're really going to talk about. So I thought we'd just talk a little bit about, first of all, is it important? Obviously, spoiler alert, I think it is. And then second of all, if we think it's important, why is it hard to do? And then what will it take to get there? So that's really where I think we'll go with this trajectory for the next 30 minutes. But I really like these conversations, these panels, to not be fully scripted and to actually be a little bit spontaneous. So I'm happy to, if there's an urgent question from the audience, let's do that, and we'll just take this where it'll be interesting for everyone. Sound good? Everyone's bought in? All right, great. All right, so first question, why is this important? So interestingly, we have one person on the panel who does not work globally right now. So I thought we'd start there with Shinu, who works in Optum, which is largely a US-based company. So I thought maybe if you could tell us your perspective on that, it might be a different perspective from the rest of the panel.
Absolutely. So I think initially I heard a couple of different questions, like, is it important? Do I believe in it? So yes, I think it is very important. As you mentioned, it is another frontier for us. And as we think about patient journeys and really understanding how to best serve patients to better outcomes, we need to understand who's in the health system and as well as outside the health system. I think from an Optum lens, what I would say, and not just Optum lens, but having been in the space, in the data space now for about 16 years, what I can say is we're not there with the quality of data yet. And so what I would really push on us is not just is it important, but I think there's still so much left to be done with regard to really making sure as we're acquiring data, as we're harmonizing data, as we're then sustainably delivering it, I'm not sure we're fully there yet. And I say this because as somebody who oversees a group where we've got our data factories running, I can say that we spend an enormous amount of time on this. So back to your question, is it important? Yes, it's important, but I almost want to reframe the question and say, relative to what? You know, today we heard about genomics, we've heard a lot of other data sets. And so it just, for me, being in the market, it's which one of these things is a priority and how do we make sure we do it really well? And so I don't know if this is my moment to tee it up to Sunil, not that you scripted it, but I almost feel like, Sunil, that's the question that I have is, A, is it important, but two, okay, important relative to what? Because there's a lot of frontiers out there.
Yeah, so Takeda is a global company, and global real-world data is extremely important to us. Historically, we have used mostly US data. But for anything outside the US, like in Europe, the drugs are not going to be approved if you don't have local country data, right? So we are struggling with that a little bit because of local country regulations, the healthcare providers and the institutions, the way they collect the data, it's different, by country, and the privacy laws are different. The regulation is very stringent. Most of the data we get from ex-US is they don't expose patient-level data, unlike our US data counterparts, where it's much easier. So it's an extremely important topic for us, and we're trying to source data from our data partners outside the US, including Asia, but yeah, it's a challenge, and the way we'll get there is having a consortium, pan-European countries, Asia Pac, and as well the government getting involved, and kind of giving a little bit of a leeway in terms of the policies, and as well the people having trust in these organizations, and kind of consenting to sharing the data. So, yeah, that's my take on it.
So, Sunil, you almost teed up the next question, because what I'm hearing is it's important and it's hard. That's what I'm hearing. And it's funny, when I met Gadi, gosh, 8-9 years ago now, I remember thinking to myself, he's taking on this EMR problem, and he's the crazy guy who's putting a machine in every hospital. And that's hard. So I thought maybe, Gadi, you can tell us about why globalization is particularly hard.
Thank you. And can I add another fact about me, just to wake people up? So,
yeah.
Because thank you for being with us at such a late part of the day. So my son tattooed the logo of TriNetX, my company, on my leg. Just wanted to add that. I'm not going to show it to you because it includes taking off my pants.
That means you, that means you actually have to stay for the happy hour for that, part.
It's here, it's here.
Depends.
So why is it hard? So in business school, there was one of my American friends showed me a map of the world, and it was all the states in the US, and outside the borders of the US, it said things like, "There be dragons," and all the facts were very wrong. And so the world is very diverse, as you know. I don't need to say that. Everybody like us that dedicate their life for the greater good of mankind and try to solve with science all the health problems that we have is trying to balance patient privacy and then the use of data for research. So I think just like, and it's very different. So just like some countries, you pay more for the same drug, and they fund drug development everywhere else, it's the same with data. Some countries, it's just easier to use de-identified data for clinical research, and some countries, it's just harder. And I think the countries that make it harder, they're just free riding in a way, the countries that are a bit more liberal with that. So again, everyone is trying to fight the same thing, but the way they legislate around it is very different. And it's okay. It's humans, and they just find different ways to balance this. So one is legal. The second is just a massive problem. If you ever try to integrate two Epic installations, it's very hard. Now, in TriNetX, we harmonize data from Japan, Brazil, Germany, Italy, and the US. I mean, we operate in 30 countries. It's a massive problem to find a master ontology that can take all of that and submit it to Sunil in a way that he can find value in it. So it's a legal problem, it's a problem of the data. And the last thing I'll say, you know, life sciences industry to me is science heavily regulated with a capitalistic wrapper. So most boards and most companies will not make the necessary investment to go after data from outside the US. And it's a 5 to 10 year investment. So most people just decide not to do that, not to take on that challenge. Right. And we were born like that. We did it from day one, so for us it's very natural.
So I think you're really taking that from the perspective of sort of regulatory, technical, and in your current life as an aggregator and therefore provider of data. So let's flip it around. And Ashish, I'd love to hear, as a leverager of data, as a consumer of data, can you tell us sort of how you're thinking about, like, what's the hardest aspect for you about this? And if you have a story about a tattoo, feel free to bring it in.
Show us what you have.
You can't match Gadi's tattoos, so I think it's a good perspective, and I think in one of the previous panels, this topic did come up. So I think all of us know healthcare is very local. And this is not just true for US, it's true for most markets. And healthcare is what generates data. So think of just what systems are generating data, and if you layer in culture aspect, privacy aspect, regulatory aspects, that's what exposes the data for us to use. The challenge I think we focus on is we expect that same standard which we see in US are available elsewhere, and we see various different layers being applied what data can be exposed. As Gadi mentioned, some places you can get to identifiable data and you can use it for a purpose. What we are learning is that if you be very objective about what value are you bringing back to the ecosystem. So these data generated by the providers, they're generated by the providers on behalf of the patients. In many places, payers are providing the data sets. Current viewpoint we have is that let's make this data available and we will use it for research. That's what manufacturers typically approach it as. A lot of providers want certain evidence proof. I think vaccines in the pandemic actually proved it very well. Wherever we have seen that there's an additional value getting delivered back to the healthcare ecosystem, we are seeing it's easier. Where it's a one-way traffic where data is just getting exposed and we are looking at regulations and we're going around regulations and the cultures and privacies to find the data, there's a reluctance in terms of, okay, what are you using this data for? So the trust equation is very low because what they're not seeing is the value back to the healthcare ecosystem. And this brings the topic back that should we just focus on real-world data, especially when you go global, purely for evidence generation purpose? Or should we expand it back to tell them about how disease is progressing? For example, what are the high-risk patient population? For example, providers where they are treating patients and the patients have refractory in the current disease and they can go to the next step. I think more and more we start thinking about that value back to the healthcare ecosystem. We see this loop getting easier and easier. Current situation is that it's a unidirectional. It's like manufacturers asking for research data. And question is that you see about lag about 5-10 years before the research data translates into a product which goes in the marketplace. So that's kind of what practical challenges we are seeing. And hence we are pushing back on that, don't have evidence lens, have a real world data lens to it, which is money usage across, not just evidence generation.
Yeah, I really like that. And as you were talking, I was thinking about something else that I think that makes it hard is almost everyone's expectations. So if anybody's worked on US data, they have an expectation of, well, I can do any use case for anything. It can be regulatory grade. I can use it for my sales rep optimization, right? It can be this massive sort of breadth and depth of data. And one of the challenges that I've been feeling deeply as we're trying to bring as much of this as we can elsewhere is that the data just will be helpful in some places more than others. Yep. And so I don't know if anybody's come across that sort of expectation setting issue.
I mean, as you can imagine, being at Optum, we have the privileged seat of working in pretty much, I think, all aspects of the healthcare markets. So provider, payer, consumer/patients, as well as obviously life sciences. And that's where we're challenging. You know, people are like, you guys are sitting on so much data. I mean, we have, I think, 15% of care delivery networks in the United States. So yeah, we are sitting on a lot of data, but I think what you hit on is regulatory grade data. And for us, that is where our true north has always been, is really making sure that things are to the regulatory level. And when we look at, when we're focused on both efficacy as well as some of the other use cases. And so I would just share with you all very openly, that's where we have the tension of like what data is good enough. So for example, when we're working with Sunil or someone else and he's maybe pitching to another part of Optum, we're very careful that the level of scrutiny of what's the quality of the data and what the insights providing is up par. And right now, I mean, I'd be interested to hear from the panelists, like our level is regulatory grade data, like what can be published. And so, sorry, I'm gonna pick on you again, Sunil, but like I would love your thoughts on that, because maybe our true north is too high up there.
Yeah, as a sponsor, we we do expect a lot of rigor in the data. We do get, so depending on the use case, right? So we talk about real world data being applicable all the way from drug discovery through post-market surveillance. And historically, it's always been used more for post-market surveillance. But we are seeing more and more use cases across the continuum, including drug discovery, drug development, label expansions, right? So when you go for label expansions, or when you're doing for rare diseases, for example, single arm control trial, right? That is when the regulatory grade applicability comes in for the data, right? For commercial use cases, when you're doing physician marketing, it's okay. It doesn't have to be that kind of grade. But it depends on the use case, and we do work with Optum a lot, but and they have been pretty good in terms of what we're looking for, but we're always on the lookout for biomarker data, genomics data, multi-omics data, right? And then when we go for submissions to the FDA, that is when, if there is a question that comes from the regulators, you got to understand the provenance of the data. It's not just the quality of the data, but you want to be able to trace back to the source of the data, including how the data was actually transformed through the process before it got to us. So it's a huge thing. We're not there yet, but I think if people, if companies work in tandem, we can get there, but we're not there yet, I think.
Well, this is something I think about a lot, is this difference between good enough data and regulatory grade data and the spectrum in between. And I know this is really tough right now in Europe, right? And there are other geographies. I mean, we were really looking at data globally. One of the most amazing databases I've found is in South Africa. But I'd be really curious to hear where you see us landing, and maybe I'll start with Gadi on this one. Where are we globally on this range of data, right? And the North Star is always going to be regulatory grade data, because that's where we can sort of use the data to really have, like you're talking about, Ashish, that direct feedback into the healthcare, the health of taking care of patients. So I'm really curious, are we ever going to get to regulatory grade data on that kind of scale without needing 6-month lead time, et cetera? That's something that's on my mind a lot.
So yeah, I love what Shinu said, even though she never wrote a book like Sunil here.
Not yet, not yet.
So,
I mean, if you got a tattoo, then I think I could get the book.
we thought back there that Sunil should just open his book and read for 30 minutes and we'll be done with it. But, you know, you buy a Ferrari to take it to the racetrack, and then when you go do your groceries, drive something else, perhaps more cost-effective. I think the same goes what you said, Sunil, fit for purpose. You know, there's a lot of research, a lot of discoveries, a lot of science to do. With data that's not regulatory grade, cheaper to get, you can refresh it on an hourly, daily, monthly basis and get a lot of access to it. We at TriNetX have more than 30 million lives in Europe just like that. It's refreshed automatically. It's not regulatory grade. You can try to submit it. Maybe they'll accept it. But it's for research and for analysis and for protocol design and feasibility, etc. And a week ago, we bought a company in Europe that we didn't close yet, so I can't say anything about it more than this. Like my tattoo, I talk about it, but I don't show it. I'll tell you we did it, but we didn't close it yet. But that company takes regulatory grade data in oncology in Germany, France, Spain, Italy, UK, and other countries. That data is being submitted to the regulator in Europe on a regular basis, and it can also be shipped physically to a pharma customer because it becomes anonymized. So it's just expensive to get it, more than the way we built a platform. So if you need it like that, there is more value for you. You'll pay more. We're paying those physicians to lift that data, and they're going to use it. So it's all available, and it's all possible. It's just different flavors. And if you build it right and you price it right, it does the trick. It will never be, I think, auto-magically updated, always available, and also called regulatory grade, et cetera. We all read the publications of the FDA. If I had to distill it to one sentence, what the FDA believes is regulatory grade in this country is chart review data that was lifted by humans in a process that could be quality checked and audited, et cetera, et cetera. So, but this is where it is now, right? There is a journey. 5 years, 10 years from now, maybe things will be different.
So Ashish, I'd really love to hear your thoughts on that similar vein, because what I'm really hearing here is an aspiration to be able to use all of these data beyond the US, I think whose regulatory environment makes it easier, right? So we're a little bit further along that journey. How are you, in a very global organization, leveraging these data today? And then how would we actually see ourselves getting to a point where we can really have a truly global data asset? Is that even a reasonable aspiration?
Yeah, I think the one thing goes back to this word global. I think in healthcare, as I said, I think our experience is that we always find healthcare being local. The data generated is very local, contextual. The pandemic proved it wrong, but there's a perfect case where global did come together. They shared the data. I think one of the commissioners mentioned that we made a decision of 4th dose based on data generated by Israel. It hasn't happened across many therapy areas. So that kind of a participation and sharing is changing. So what we're seeing is that when we are realizing that if there are certain diseases which present themselves in a similar way across geographies, if they're not represented or constrained by the different healthcare system based on resources available, screening available, and so forth, those information should become available. Unfortunately, it took a pandemic for us to start making the data available. In real life, that's the data, I think, going back to Gary's point, cost money. Second step is that many of these data sets are generated by this healthcare system, which standards are quite choppy. Some places you'll see a lot more good capture, the codes are very well defined. Other places you'll see a lot of things sitting in notes, which is unstructured, and technology is emerging to refine it. The problem becomes is that to create a global data sets, we need to get that to a certain standard. And standards are almost always begging for a question. So if you go to a data model, which I mentioned that you cross picking 3 countries and bringing a common data model, that common data model has to serve certain questions. That's not good enough to serve other questions. So the evolving thinking is that you can have a global RWD data sets, but they have to be curated for a very specific set of questions. And that's more pragmatic approach to take, because you can get 3 questions answered by bringing data together in this format, because I'm not trying to boil the ocean of getting all the features available to us. Just to give a practical example, what we are going through is that we invest a lot of energy in developing these, what we call patient identification, treatment escalation algorithms. The biggest struggle we have is that these algorithms, the math is pretty much there. What we struggle is the training data, what we train the data on, what we predict the data on, and so forth. Of course, US always becomes a choice. The moment we take it to German market or Japan or New Zealand, we had to retrain those models in the local data sets. And the constraint is There are technologies out there, transfer learnings and all we're using to do, so we use Optum data to test them, Optum EMR data set to test them in the US market, and we do transfer learning, but very quickly we realized that model has to evolve because those features which are available in, say, Optum EMR data sets are not available in New Zealand for me. So I have to go back and retrain the model. Those are logical constraints of us being realistic and pragmatic that let's try to find a purpose-driven approach to this global RWD data sets. And what we truly want to do is that the common bar is evidence. I think that has always been a common bar where if you're developing a therapy, you're developing for multi-markets and so forth, it becomes, can we bring it down to other usage? And another learning we have is that some of this evolution of quality of data requires investment. And that's where many of these providers, they're very eager to figure out how do I improve the quality of my data? And hence you'll see short-term, we think it's a way which is going on, which a lot of them are looking at monetizing their own data sets. So a lot of EMR systems, provider networks, they're trying to monetize the data sets because they want to fund back the investment to make the quality of data better. So, and this kind of cycle economic viability is what we are stuck with. So I don't want to be pessimistic about will ever get a global real-world data. Answer is yes, we'll get it. This pandemic has proven it. But question that we have to be very pragmatic about what questions are we answering with that global data sets.
I think that's right. And so I think what I'm hearing is, yes, it's important. I think I'm hearing we'll get there and we'll be able to do anything, but it may be an issue of cost. And I'm also hearing it's really hard from a technology standpoint, right, to have interoperable data on a global scale. So I'm just curious if you all could wave a magic wand, what's the problem you would fix? What would be the beautiful, perfect global data set? Or even just tell me what your use case would be. I'd really love to hear to you, like, what's the ideal global data landscape, 5, 10, what was the number this morning?
2050.
2050, right? I won't do that math, 28 years from now. What does that look like? So let's see, Sunil.
So I can go first, yeah. So I think if globally all the providers can agree to some kind of common method of data collection, if you will.
So is this data providers or healthcare providers?
Healthcare providers. And then coming down to the data providers and forming a consortium where data sharing happens more easily, right? And then defining a common data model like OMOB and an extension of that. So when the data is eventually stored or disseminated, it happens in a very standard format. Would be, in my case, an ideal where you're not spending too much time curating the data downstream and doing a lot of transformations to the data eventually for using it. So for example, 2 Epic systems, giving out, different formats, I think that should change. There should be more uniformity in how data is collected and how data is transformed into some kind of common model that can be consumed across the globe.
So your ideal is that all the systems are interoperable and usable so we can get to the fun part of insights.
Exactly.
Since this is I guess this is my magic wish. My magic wish would be that all stakeholders understand, so patients, each of us as consumers, providers, payers, life sciences companies, understand the value. Ashish, it goes back to what you said. What is the value they're getting and making sure that it is signed off from sharing data? Because that will, of course, drive regulation. And I think the technical burden is real. I live it, pay for it, but I'm actually very focused on making sure that people understand the value. So for the give, they understand what the get is. And that's what I would hope magically happens by 2050.
So Gadi, aside from TriNetX running the world, what's your ideal?
World peace. We left the solar system, and but I think we can deal with the legalities, GDPR, and that's not the problem really. I think everything digital. No more notes, no more things buried, no more PDFs, none of that, forgive me, BS stuff. everything digital, we can map it, we can deal with, again, the legalities of it, but just everything becomes digital, and then with DataVant, you know, it just becomes more liquid, and we can do the balance between patient privacy and research. Just everything to be data that can be worked with, you know?
Yeah. Ashish, last word to you.
It's a magic wand. So 28th now, patients own their own data. They know what to bring and what they will get in return. And we develop models where the value they get out of the models, they'll develop a system, depend upon what they can contribute back. So we in some way liberate the data from sitting in silos or providers or payers or manufacturers owning it. It should be owned by patients, and everybody else should worry about what outcomes they can deliver to those patients. And I think it will happen before 28 years. See?
Great. We're out of time. Thanks for spending some time with us. Very nice to meet you all.